Hey there, welcome to episode 104 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation here in Vegas. We were recording this on February 11, 2025, very late in the evening at 10:10 p.m. Today's topic, the title of the episode, We Need Open Government. Open government meaning really open data, visibility in the process, observability is important. When we don't have it, who knows what happens. The Innovate for Vegas Foundation, in case you are new to this audio program, is a Nevada nonprofit, 501c3 public charity. Our purpose is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. Purposely vague. We used to be Code for Vegas. Now we are Innovate for Vegas, which is more inclusive a term. We recently talked about inclusivity, diversity, and accessibility, three of our pillars. Inclusivity, really about anyone who wants to volunteer for our all-volunteer organization, being invited to do so. Diversity being a variety of backgrounds and experiences, especially more experienced and less experienced people collaborating. And accessibility, of course, it's always nice when people can make use of resources, either digital online or in the real world. So we focus on the normal person, especially with 40 million people visiting the greater Vegas area each year, and elevating our communities, whether they are Vegas locals or just visiting. So we need open government. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you are able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes and several links that are related to today's episode. I will read you the summary in the show notes, and then we'll go through the links really quickly. This episode may be rather long, so maybe 2x would be good when you're listening. So the summary is this. The news of late includes many mentions of recent findings at the level of the federal government concerning foreign aid and science and maybe education and emergency management, and the list goes on. Some of the confusion or lack of clear understanding may be due to the notion that federal government has been hiding data, hiding errors, corruption, fraud, and so on. Suppose these pieces of data, billions of them or more, were visible to the public. Spoiler alert ahead. A lot of this data actually is. Oh, there's the spoiler already. It's just that people don't know about it. The links for today's episode, the usual 4 to get started, innovate4vegas.org, our homepage, innovate4, F-O-R, Vegas, and then period, org. That's our homepage. You'll find our gatherings calendar, some other salient information about ongoing initiatives and so on. Projectact.info, project-act.info is about our autonomous cohort tessellation initiative. It has its own website. Agile for Volunteers, similar. Agile for, F-O-R, volunteers, period. Org is our own take on the agile methodologies from 24 years ago, I think, which was established by and for software developers, programmers. But we are extending that to any volunteers. Remember, inclusivity. You don't have to be a programmer to be a contributor to the elevation of your own communities or others. So Agile for Volunteers, our attempt to make the Agile methodology apply across disciplines and on volunteer time. And Mastodon.Vegas, M-A-S-T-O-D-O-N, Mastodon.Vegas. One of these days that will launch. That's fallen off the priorities a little bit, but I like to put the link in there just so that it's getting around a little bit. So one of these days when you check out Mastodon.Vegas, you'll be able to engage with the Activity Pub Fediverse right here in Vegas. Now some relevant links for today's episode. In that spoiler, I mentioned data is available at the secret URL, so don't tell anyone, data.gov, D-A-T-A, period, G-O-V. Just like that, access to data. Now, we'll talk about this today. It's not always up to date and current and real time, certainly not real time. But the Open Data, Open Government Act, I have it, I'll mention it later in more detail, from 2017 or 18, I think it was 2018, enables this. So they publish open data from open government, attempts at open government, so that people, the taxpayers, if you like, can make use of this data. So data.gov, it's been around for, 6 years now? 7 years? Check it out. There's an example. If you search for data sets, you can find USAID data sets. So I have a link directly to the catalog. Catalog sorted on organization for USAID-gov. That's the URL. And these are examples of the data that are published since the USAID, the entire agency, program, initiative, all the employees, there's civic employees, civil service. So these are all people that have been working on this for a very long time, probably without people knowing some of the finer points. So that's where some of their data that is published. And we'll get into one of the issues with published versus internal data. City of Las Vegas Open Data. It is hosted on ArcGIS, arcgis.com. So it's open data portal Las Vegas.opendata, one word, .arcgis.com. That is where the City of Las Vegas hosts some of its open data, published open data. There's additional GeoCommons data. There is, I think there's a third one. There are links to these all other sources of data. They're all posted and published on ArcGIS. So if you start there, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, I think there's a link to other data sources. So City of Las Vegas has its own city scale, although bigger than the city, more like Southern Nevada in some cases, a collection of data sets. So where data.gov has 307,000. You can check that yourself. They have a lot of data sets. City of Las Vegas has nowhere near as many, but certainly has many. One of the ones I like to pull up in the GeoCommons is business licenses. So they have a little dot on a map for each business license in essentially Clark County, not just Las Vegas. And there's a lot. The City of Las Vegas, CLV, Open Checkbook is an example of how the city reports the money that it's spending. So you can follow that link. So ArcGIS pages, open-checkbook, open-checkbook. I always say dash. It's really technically, I think, a hyphen. So you can see how the city is spending money, where the money is going. There's an open budget and an open checkbook. So if you're feeling bored on a Thursday night, you can certainly compare the two. I have a link to the Recoding America book website, recodingamerica.us. Jennifer Polka, the founder of Code for America, wrote this book. I think it's her second book, third. I actually read the book. I have thoughts. But the concept is good. The book itself was, I found, lacking. Bureaucracy, just so you remember what that means, a Wikipedia page. Bureaucracy. So that's it so far for the links. Let's get to the show. Again, this will be kind of a long one, so I'm going to take one moment, get some water. Hey, we're back. The pause will probably get truncated out, so I was not gone for more than 0.7 seconds. Let's start with closed data. Most of us like our privacy, so we don't share some things with others, which would ideally mean not sharing those items online. Some do not follow this notion. Our oversharing friends who live their life like an open book, thanks to more and more social media outlets to play on, some of them even enabling monetization of this life online, which of course is a feedback loop that makes it worse and worse. For the most part, though, there are certain things we tend not to share, including what is called personally identifying information, or PII. These are the pieces of information that are often prohibited, especially if others share this information. So think email address, home address. It's sometimes called doxing. You might tell everyone on your favorite social media platform where your sworn enemy lives. And again, their phone number, their private email address, and so on. So if you dox someone, you are telling your audience or people that find what you have to say or write, personally identifying information about someone else. And this is usually a violation of terms of service at best, I guess, or at worst as far as enforcement, and a violation of the law sometimes. And it can sometimes lead to people getting harassed or worse, because sometimes the lunatic fringe will go to their home or will harass them on the phone and so on. So oversharing on the personal level of your own data is bad enough, but if you share the personal information of others, that's no good. There are secrets that any entity, whether a person or a federal government or anywhere in between, should keep secret and not make generally available. Let us assume that this is just a fact of life, which can make complete open sharing impossible. You do have to put some limits, but which does not preclude open data sharing implemented to a point. So redaction is not really suitable because usually that happens late. Redacting existing data, so print documents from days of old. But if you have your data in a database, in a private database, then private information can stay private, except when people have access to that private database and they choose to view or consume or make use of, extract, copy, send, copy to a thumb drive, whatever the case may be. But having that private data and then treating it as though it were your own are two separate things. And so the more private data stored in more places, the more likely that private data will get out. And we've seen this millions of times at this point, where a data breach will result in personally identifying information from all of the customers. There was a data service in Florida, I believe it was mid-2024 or so. They had a data breach such that 100% of their data was compromised, stolen, and they had all of the social security numbers for all of the people, including those deceased, for a long time. So the fact that the Doge team is in the Treasury and having access to social security numbers and so on, at this point is interesting but not new. Your social security number is available online, as is everyone else's. So what is open data? Closed data is the stuff we don't want to share. Open data, similar to open source software or open source intellectual property in general, is designed to be accessible and useful to others and is published in such a way, with licensing and maintenance of validity and so on, to enable others to make use of these pieces of data in creative ways, some ways that you may not have thought about, especially if they mix shake and bake. If they take data from over here and data from over there and they put it together, new applications using this open data sets. A tremendous amount of data generated by our federal government and its various agencies and outsourced relationships and cash flows as aid and grants and safety net programs and so on, are actually shared as part of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018. See, I did write it down, which includes the Open Government Data Act. So that's in the document. I believe there's actually an amendment to some existing codes or something. You can read it. I skimmed over it, but if you're a government if you're a legislative action wonk, if you're really into that, you can read through it. It's a good skim. Not exactly exciting reading, but the Open Government Data Act, aimed at technology and data management, so making data available for public consumption and use. I guess it was signed in 2018, so it probably started in 2019 or so. But say the notion is at least about 7 years old as I'm speaking right now. There is still a general problem in our system. So the government, the overall Fed, the public funding private profit challenge, but these open data sets are a start. And there are quite a few of them available via catalogs on the data.gov website. So you can search through catalogs of data to find different data sets. So for as long as the data remains in place anyway, with all manner of data types and sources, many reasonably current. They do have data archives as well. So it's a little bit of it's not misleading, but it would be great if they tell you the total number of data sets on the homepage, data.gov. It would be nice if there was a kind of a number of data sets modified in the last 30 days, 90 days, or made current or added and you can see there's some other stats on recently you added and and so on. But just the top number gives an impression that it's a little bit more exciting than it is. And actually, data.gov is not very exciting. I'll warn you right now. So there's a gap. It is almost certain that the data found in open data data sets. So I'll try to make it clear. Here I'm saying open data as in data.gov. Open data data sets are extracted, transformed, and loaded into a public data source. This is an ETL process, as we call it, literally, that moves data in one format from one or more places. And when I say format, I mean like columnar tables and naming conventions and whatever other specifics. So you have one collection of data in, say, the private database inside the USAID infrastructure, and then it is extracted, it is transformed into something that is consumable in the public data sets. So remove or rename or expand abbreviations or whatever you want to do. You can do it, go through just about anything. Transform it, and then you load it into the public data set. ETL. It's a little bit more to it than that, but not much. That's about it. So move it from one to another. So there you go. Since there are pieces of data on the other side of this open data source store, so we have the public open data source. On the other side, we have data stored with the real authoritative data. That is, and let me fix one typo here. And this, by the way, is not necessarily bad. So I said earlier, social security numbers or personal identifying information may be stored on the private side. It is possible that operational schema are very complicated and serve many uses. You want to extract, transform, or load, so you publish that data to be more concise, or maybe it's a subset of the data. So you might have a collection of data that's relationally linked, like relational database. So you say, oh, we want the data set to contain this subset of this collection of data. So this is not a question of hiding data. It's a question of presenting some subset in a useful way. But also you want to be aware of privacy protections if there are individually identifying private personal identifying information, or if there are confidential or secret pieces of information. The question then is, why would those pieces of information be stored in a database that would be accessible in that manner? That's some of the stuff we'll be learning in the next days, weeks, and months, maybe years. There's always a strong likelihood that some data behind the scenes are not published for whatever reason, including, like I just said, personal or entity privacy, national security, and so on. So I like it when I get ahead of myself in my notes. It's like I actually wrote them myself. This is where the data governance comes into play, which guides use and access to the data in the back and how it moves and becomes available via the data sets in the front. So that, in other words, the back is the private data inside the wall, inside the facility, so hopefully password and secure and maybe even encrypted. That would be nice. It is the 21st century after all. When they ETL, you take that data, you put it in the front, which is on the public facing side of the world, and then people can have access to some subset of the data from the back. The front, the open data usually has a data governance component. The open data is by its nature open with licensing terms, but much less in the way of restrictions to access. So whatever is published, you usually can just see it. You can usually download it, often in like a spreadsheet. Not always ideal, but it's a start anyway. Standard structure for moving data around. When you download this data, you may have to provide some attribution. You may be able to use it completely unencumbered. Like, feel free to use it in a commercial application or something. You can check the terms. I don't know if data.gov has restrictive terms on any particular data sets. I think you're pretty much, because you paid for it, so it's published to be open. But do check the licensing and other terms when you do choose to explore and make use of open data. So the ETL problem in the news as I'm recording this, anecdotes published via the X, formerly Twitter, social media platform by its owner, Elon Musk, also the head of the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, concerning deduplicated social security number data. a supposition that there are duplicate transactions for any given social security number where there should be a single transaction, so i.e. the allegation of duplicate payments. So he's really talking about one social security number getting the equivalent of payments for multiple security numbers. Obviously, a social security monthly payout would be multiple payments, but there's the allegation in this case that there are multiple payments where there should be one. Specifically vague because this is a assessment published on a social media platform, almost as if it's, hey, look what I found, and it's not actually detailed. And I've actually looked into this a tiny bit. There's a former Social Security office manager. That's a role that means authoritatively handling data, managing the flow of data in and out, payments and so on in a regional office. And he went through some of the things that are probably being found, but because this is a description of a description, it's not really, you're not looking at the data tables directly. You're not looking at the actual private data that's being stored. Someone might say, hey, there's a whole bunch of tables here with no names. And then someone will say, well, but those foreign keys are pointing to the other data tables, and one of them has, username, password, whatever, right? So merely describing what you're seeing in a database may not be indicative of what's actually stored. It depends on how this data is structured and whatnot. So according to this former member of the Social Security Administration, is that what it's called? SSA? SSNs? Social Security numbers? This person said, this is totally normal. And sometimes if you have historical data from, the Social Security program was started in 1928, 27, somewhere in there. No, not 27. I think 30, 37, 38, 36, 30, somewhere in there, 30s. Part of the Depression and social safety net and so on. FDR, not the point of this episode. So some people had paper or less, right? They had paper Social Security cards for a very long time. I have one somewhere. Back in those days, there were none. So anyone who's been around for long enough will have had opportunities to have the wrong Social Security number because they wrote it down wrong or they transposed digits and so on. So in the pre-digital age, there were errors. And according to the description of how this works from someone who knew, these errors were accounted for. And so sometimes they'd actually have to go and correct Social Security transactions from over the years if they found that someone had the wrong number, or there were some cases where people were using they were duplicating numbers because they were using a sample number or there are other variations on this. So the bottom line here is that those who know how the system works, and of course there's always that what's called tribal knowledge, like it's not really handled well. You just have to kind of know what to do when this happens. And you have to do some research on who the actual people were, same number, different employers. Okay, that might be, or if somebody comes in or contacts directly and says, hey, here's the situation. So you kind of have to deal with these depending on the circumstance. So there are many assertions and allegations regarding the data that the DOJ team, if you like, are finding within the private databases of various government agencies, and those are being dumped into the public, raising suspicion. Because nobody knows how those systems work. Now, if you speak to someone who knows how they work, how the systems are laid out, how the data is structured, how they actually handle it, how they address errors, how they address data being just simply incorrect or transposed. So these are end user or customer errors. There are the ways that they manage data. There was something about, he said there's always been a rumor since the 80s, I think it was, that there are however many dead people, deceased, Social Security number payment recipients. And he said they basically, once you get the death certificate, you remove the account holder. But so there were sometimes delays with that, but he said these are all part of a regular process. That's totally normal. So, you can take his opinion, this former Social Security administrator, versus the opinion of someone who has just been mucking around in the data for a few days. It would be nice if those people had a conversation, perhaps in public, so that other people would see and say, oh, okay, now we have some insights. Is the data perfect? Probably not. Is it as rampantly felonious and fraudulent and so on as is being alleged? It doesn't sound like that's really something to allege until more clarity and more understanding of how the data is structured and so on would be available. So yeah, having that discussion would be useful, I think, for everybody. Even the USAID program, I've heard all the pronunciations. USAID, 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 has more than 2,000 published data sets available in the data.gov catalog, which I've linked to directly, for anyone curious and brave enough to dive in and start looking. Are the data published there complete so far as the data governance policy, maintaining privacy and security of recipients of aid monies, where appropriate and legal, for example? Or has the ETL process that brought data from private internal USAID databases to the published open data sources has the ETL process removed some data that would be embarrassing or worse, fraudulent, as is being alleged? Anecdotes published to social media are not official and credible audits, so we don't actually know. We only have hearsay. We have, look what I found, not here's an audit of all of this data with the results that is visible for all to see. So you can always cherry pick, as they say. This doesn't look right. Well, if you scroll down 2 pages, you'll see the other half of the thing you're saying doesn't look right, and you'll see where it actually does look right. And I'm not saying that there isn't bad or worse data in the USAID private database or databases, but I am suggesting that merely selecting some of the data and making allegations is not fair. There may be a there, as they say, but hiding the data, keeping it private, and then making allegations in public without a real investigation and examination is probably unfair, probably misleading, probably has some sort of motivation. It's hard to say. We're not even getting into the politics of this. Which I have no interest in that for the purposes of this audio program, especially. But we are saying that the process may be lacking if you don't understand what you're looking at. Anecdotes published on social media are not official. That's really the take home. If we assume that private databases will have data in them that must remain private and secret, we should at least be able to learn the database schema or the design of the database, which would describe the data stored within. Should we not be able to do that? If there is a social security number column, for example, we could be allowed to know that without knowing the individual social security numbers themselves. That would allow the general public, so maybe people who are data savvy, database oriented people, data scientists and so on, they would be able to say, oh, okay, so this table of data has a social security number column. And if you see all of that data schema across a huge collection of government databases and elsewhere, you might say, wow, the social security number shows up in a lot of places. You don't need to see the actual numbers. You just have to know that there's a column, SSN. You say, wow, social security numbers are used in 10,000 databases. That means the number is exposed in 10,000 different places. So it'd be useful to know that. Will we get there? Probably not. We should be able to learn database schema. So if there is, we should know that. Couple this with public data governance policy regarding the ETL process that moves these pieces of data to published open data datasets, and we have a reasonable starting point for concerns if things don't appear to make sense. More than anecdotes found in tweets. So we should be able to at least observe what the data looks like, whether we see the actual data or not, just so we have some handle on what do they really store there. So the open data problem. The data.gov website is a great and interesting resource. Some state governments and localities, like City of Las Vegas, have also published open data datasets, as you can see with our open government data published on ArcGIS from the City of Las Vegas. And I will note here that the Code for Vegas organization from 12 years ago, I wrote a decade ago or so that's probably better. So about a decade ago, Code for Vegas was a part of Code for America, played an integral role in launching the city's open data program. So Code for Vegas volunteers worked with Code for America and City of Las Vegas to roll out the open data program about a decade ago. Neat. Did you have any idea that such data were published anywhere before you began listening to this episode of this audio program? A substantial problem becomes apparent when presumptions about data availability are asserted, published in media, and discussed without awareness prior to locating and making use of open data sources and their content. So in other words, there's no way to find that. Oh, wait, there's someone. There's 4,000 data sets that have relevant information because people just don't know. They don't know. They don't think to know. They don't know to think, to look, to assume or to presume that this data is available. They just say, oh, the government never tells us. What we may have then is a combination of the fire hose problem, which is there's simply so much data that there's no practical exploration of it possible. Maybe it's even intimidating. And the user experience problem, where even if someone did want to explore this vast trove of open data, just go to data.gov and pull up those 2,000 data sets from USAID, and you can start to see what they're really spending money on, sort of. The missing piece appears to be the application of all this open data. So essentially what happens is there's so much, if you even know that there is such a collection of data or references to in catalogs, what do you even do with it? Like, okay, we have hundreds and thousands of data sets. We have a couple of thousand that might be relevant to something I'm looking for. Now what? Oh, just go ahead and start downloading. There's data sets that have been updated 10 years ago, 20 years ago. No, not 20, probably. 10 years ago. Was it 10 years? Yeah. There were some data sets from 2009. So the data is not limited to when the act was signed in 2018. It goes back farther, but it doesn't go back. I don't think it goes back too many decades. But anyway, so now you have to decide, let me find data that's current. Let me find data that is actually relevant to what I'm trying to discover here. Sometimes they're downloadable as spreadsheets, sometimes other formats. So it's kind of a slog, as they say. It can be a lot of work. And so it's not friendly to the casual person. So instead of looking at an authoritative, though perhaps filtered data source like data.gov, they choose to listen to their favorite podcaster or YouTuber who tells them, or tweeter, who tells them that everything is wrong and they've been hiding all this data. Well, now we know better. It doesn't mean 100% of the data is published. As I said, there could still be some questionable things that one might discover, but the first step is to see that some data is available. Is all the data available? We've already gone through that. There's also a delay. So merely publishing data out into public is a great idea, but it is only part of the overall picture. We need to be able to look. We need to be able to look at it as members of a democratic republic. Let's assume we still are, hopefully. Making the data available and wishing everybody all the best is not necessarily going to make anything happen. Nobody's going to say, oh, okay, let me view that data. And of course, with the advent of AI tools rampant, it might be interesting to know if you examine data sets, maybe with a large language model, but now there are more specialized models and so on. So you might say, oh, let's go through. And this is allegedly what the Doge team is doing, is magically feeding a bunch of data into some sort of an AI model and then trying to identify problems. That is interesting to do if you are not familiar with the data and you hope that the AI is not inventing issues. So who knows? It's called an opaque process. We can't see into it. Transparent would be nice. Opaque and tweets is what we're getting. So making the data available and wishing everybody well, good luck, isn't really going to connect those dots, not the least of which is greater awareness of the part of the citizenry regarding governmental process, status of various resources and populations that are within the purview of the federal government, on which some, many, most, or even all of us might depend. We might need that data, and it might be better if we understood it, but often we don't. Open applications would help, perhaps. That is, applications that make vast amounts of data meaningful to the general populace, who might, on the whole, be mostly unaware that they are what they're looking for if they're merely looking at data. This is a problem on the ArcGIS platform that hosts the City of Las Vegas data. They have some rudimentary visualization tools, so they'll plot data on a map and you can see it in tabular data. You can write an application that's hosted on ArcGIS to manipulate and display the data. They're not, first of all, nobody will find them, but second, they're fairly generic. So, and they really start, well, you can write your own application, but they really start with the given data set. So sometimes the more interesting thing to do is to combine data sets in interesting ways, but that's okay. It's on the menu. Spreadsheets are generally not appealing. Data sets are often presented as precisely as these. So spreadsheets, maps, like I said. A population with the already short attention span, such as ours, will look for an entertaining explanation of what they perceive from podcasters and TikTokers. More recently, it might be tweets. And they may well be satisfied with what they hear without examining data that is readily available for themselves to look at them for themselves. It's too daunting. It's crazy. I'm certainly not going to, and I'll tell you right now, when I visited the US AID catalog, there are 2,000 possibilities. And when you start searching through, you can see this data set was last modified in 2009. This one was from 2013. Like, okay, I really want to find current data, or maybe I do want all the historical data, but now why can't I just get one big view of all time, and then I can search through that for myself? Well, so now you're letting your end user, your customer of this data, you're leaving it to chance that they will actually do something like that. So a collection of open data applications might be interesting to start. They could be relatively simple, but they might be relatively useful instead of just saying, well, here's the data, good luck. Obviously, and of course, sample applications would be useful in general. So obviously the best way to present any particular data set, or more interesting perhaps, the interconnection of multiple data sets, would require a certain amount of experimentation. In fact, it may be that any one person might not gain understanding from one particular presentation, but might from another that is completely different, while the opposite might be true of another person. So there might be different ways to view data, and there always are. Visualizations are their own art form at this point. So what works for one person might not. Some people can look at a map and be just fine. I gave an example of the license data for generally, Clark County around Vegas. Each business license plotted as a blue dot. For the longest time, my own business was not among the data sets. So then you have to wonder, is the map is not a complete picture, literally, if you don't examine the source data. And then eventually my license status and all that was in there. So it's a question of when they last updated. Unfortunately, updating data does not mean it was updated with the latest data. So even though it said, it was updated a month ago or 2 months ago or whatever, that's weird. I got my business license 2 years ago and it's still not in there. Oh, now it's in there. So who knows? It's hard to say. Maybe if there was more demand for open data, they would actually put resources to keeping it current. They do keep it current, but you can update a database, but you don't have to call the person managing the source of that database and say, hey, have you sent over the latest license data? So open government and trust. So here's a tricky one. 3 more sections, this and 2 more. If there is one, and we're at 41 minutes by my clock, so truncation will bring that down a little bit. So if there's one thing that we will see all around us in the near term, at least, and which has existed in one form or another since at least November of 1963, and almost certainly before that, is a level of distrust in the federal and perhaps state and local governments when it comes to the stories they share, the data on which these stories are based, and the veracity that may be found and often lacking sometime later. Stories change. Oh, we will release that data someday, and so on. Someday, and so on. Is this something? The blockchain could solve this, perhaps? Maybe. Or something similar. If we leave out the crypto hype and rug pulls and drama and so on, the general use case for a blockchain is to publish blocks, so interconnected pieces of data, on a public ledger, so like a big giant spreadsheet, which is immutable and verifiable. So this chain of entries, each new link on the chain, each new block on the chain is connected to the previous so that you cannot change the history that's visible on the blockchain, on the ledger. So because every time you add a block, it depends on the previous block, if you change the previous block, the new block would not be valid, right? So that's a simplified but not inaccurate description of what's going on there. So visible and immutable, you can see all the data and you can't change it because changing it would break everything. You would know that it was changed. The blockchain infrastructure has built-in multi-hosting so that the chain is available in provably identical locations, provably identical chain content in different locations. So you could verify each location was the same as any other in a decentralized manner. So now you don't have one single central authoritative location, but you can share that information in multiple authoritative locations. The basics are useful. Whether the blockchain is as it is used today, if it's the perfect scheme, again, as it's used today, may be up to debate, which is one reason such a thing would never be implemented because of the debate. There may be a better way to facilitate a source like the U.S. Treasury publishing ledger entries for multi-client consumption, so the transactions are predictable and not taking place across multiple parties. Obviously, this is something to ponder in general, an open government scheme to maintain a level of trust so people can see how the scheme and schema work and how the data is processed and so on, and then making it clear when data must be kept private or secret, and which will be abused, of course, because you can say, we have to keep that transaction secret because of national security. Sure. See, nobody trusts the government. It's too easy to label things and then have people say, okay, if it's national security. And again, this is not political. This is just government process. And the origin story of Code for America and, the recoding book that Jennifer Polka wrote is about these sorts of things. It's about the bureaucracy, civil servants, and the process, and the politics, and the procurement workflow. And some data is not available to make that easier, and some policies of internal, operational stuff inside government organizations, and the many organizations that interact, some which do not. Obviously, this is something to ponder in general. Would the implementation of a true open government platform necessitate publication of all data to such a public ledger or ledgers? Is there no longer room for keeping private databases and data sets that may or may not align with this published ETL data? That appears to be a substantial issue, perhaps the heart of the matter. If we are told by an entity with an agenda, perhaps potential conflicts of interest that the private data sets are hiding in propriety, can we trust the data published for general consumption? So in other words, you're only showing me a subset, which we talked about earlier. What's hiding in the data you have not published? Another aspect of the blockchain environment, the story oft told, is the mitigation of trust requirements. In a data blockchain, this is probably not sufficient. The zero trust payment model and so on, so you don't need a central authority in the blockchain economy. So moving payments around, moving value around. But if you want to actually just publish data, you probably do want to know where it came from. So there would be an authority. Production by a street. So it's probably not sufficient to just not know where data came from. So you would actually have an authority of some sort publishing data, but the chain itself, the blockchain on which it's published, could exist in multiple copies, like we said. So the data would be authoritative. The source might be shared in multiple places. Hopefully it would still be authoritative. It should be immutable. So you'd be able to trust that the data was not changed, perhaps, but you wouldn't necessarily trust automatically that the data was valid initially, that it was true. If the consumer does not believe the publisher is publishing valid or complete data, the whole thing kind of doesn't work. So this is a kind of a question of social government trust models and so on. Tricky, very tricky. So open government doing the business of government is tricky also. If you do happen to flip through the Recoding America book by the founder of Code for America, again, Jennifer Polka, you will learn that the federal government and often state and local governments work on a procurement model. As I mentioned, they pay vendors for goods and services rather than taking these on as part of the bureaucracy. So rather than building a software team in a particular organization, you procure, you locate a vendor, or you publish requirements, and you have a request for proposal, perhaps an RFP. I've never worked for government, so I'm going by some presumptions and some things I've read. So they might put out a request for a proposal, and you might have different companies submit a proposal for a solution, and then there's some bidding, pricing, and so on. And then there's a contract of some sort, and the winner of the bidding process gets to work on the proposal that they have submitted and come up with a solution. So you're basically outsourcing some of the work, and that could be developing software. It could be a lot of things. Government contracting is a real thing, especially in the defense industry. So they pay the vendors, they do the goods and services development, and the bureaucracy that we keep hearing about in the news as I record this, with those working in various government agencies possessing experience and expertise regarding how that infrastructure is constructed and how the procurement process flows. If those people are made to depart under whatever circumstances, the procurement process and any sort of, again, tribal knowledge where you just kind of have to know. One of the challenges is, well, I'm going to get into this in the next point. Things can become challenging if these long-time knowledge workers are sent away with the legacy systems that keep track of internal private legacy data, storing the state and history of any particular agency and its various connections and processes remaining subject to the forensic interpretation of their context by parties who may not possess the benefit of such experience and insight. So in other words, the systems in use in these different bureaucratic structures in our federal government are operated by people who've been using them for so long that they can work around limitations. They understand the bigger picture. They understand where the connections are. They understand where you have to sometimes make sure that some data is current. The Social Security Administrator is an example of this, because as he said, some of the data in there is from pre-computer days. So there's always a possibility of error. And when you encounter an error, you pursue it. You investigate the possible cause of the error, you correct it. So rather than spending time correcting data that they don't have sources for, they basically correct or address issues on demand when they're encountered. For example, right? So every bureaucracy element probably has a variation on this. And so the people that are in the bureaucracy have a better handle on how this works. Is it because there's a lot of technical debt? Probably. Is it because there's a lot of documentation debt? Almost certainly. I don't know for a fact, but it just seems like that might be a problem. So this is where more open data practices internally might go a long way, so that at any given time, the state of any process can be deduced by anyone with access to that data, whether they should have access or not, rather than spelunking through the data sets trying to determine what is what. This appears to be the case anecdotally, almost certainly due to the very long procurement process that would apply to the infrastructure itself. So in other words, if it would be nice if let me finish the note first. How often do we hear about any government agency at any level depending solely on COBOL-based tools and mainframe platforms that are decades out of date, simply because they have not procured modern systems and implementations of software tools and processes and new database schema and so on to meet their needs? I read somewhere that just the process of ETLing, so extracting, transforming, loading, all of the tax records or whatever's in the Treasury Department, somebody will probably say, no, you can just do it like this. There's a difference between having the procured resources that will take on a project and having the time to do it and having it actually done and talking about it. So we'll see how Doge implements some of these things. But the bottom line is the infrastructure that enables the bureaucracy to function. So these are all of our civil servants and all the agencies and so on. They function using tools and methods and systems that are old because they have not spent time, or there's no budgeted time and money, resources, to even put together a proposal. And sometimes government proposals are onerous. They're extremely detailed and exacting. And in some cases, and here, if you read through the recoding book, you'll hear some of this, or you will see some of it. sometimes overly detailed, but sometimes just too much or not. It doesn't really fit into what's out in the world. So you end up having to do a lot of custom work, or you have difficult migration paths that you need to describe fully so you can put out a request for proposal and so on. So you end up sitting on old technology because it works. It doesn't work fast. It doesn't work, well, you might need that tribal knowledge, right? But you have a working system, and we shouldn't break this, because if we break it, then we have to basically get a budget line item for fixing or a massive update. Maintaining systems is probably built into the cost structures and whatnot. There's always a maintenance contract as part of a defense contract. But who's keeping track of that IBM mainframe from the 40s that's keeping track of all the data that we have in the IRS? Probably no one. The data lag in that ETL gap is difficult. So ETL is the extract, transform, load step. So you take your private data, you ETL, you extract, transform, and load into the public data sets so that normal people can see. So there's some transparency. If you were to try to look for immigration or border crossing data, which I did in the data.gov on the website, these are hot topics of late. So I figured, okay, let me see what's on there. You will find some data sets, some from 2024, some older. The entire world knows that data can be published more quickly than that, thanks to the dashboard at Johns Hopkins during the pandemic. You remember that back in 2020? So they were publishing, like daily updates on case counts, number of fatalities, so death counts, and this was based on region, city or zip code, maybe all kinds of rates and vaccination rates. So they were publishing this data every day. It was probably updated every few hours, I think it was. So we know it can be done at national scale. And actually, when you think about it, it's done at national scale because it's done at local scale and then aggregated to national scale. And then all the variants that were produced by JavaScript coders with not much else to do with schooling from home and all. So everybody was writing their own take on the daily data visualizations and so on. Ballot counts, voter registration, and purge data, uncured ballots, all typical and current examples of what could be real or near real-time reporting to public data sets. That would be concerning an election, for example, of pieces of data that would inform the public. So these are doable. So should your data sets be, from the mid-2000s, mid-2000s, 2005, 2009, 2012, maybe before in the 20th century? Sure, you can have those data sets, but should I be able to have data from today? Yeah, we should. We have the technology. So probably, just as I described with the near real-time reporting of medical data from local health departments for the purposes of generating that Johns Hopkins national, and actually it was global, right? They had multiple countries worth of data, but the U.S. data, you could actually look, it was a little bit more transparent. So for example, the Southern Nevada Health District, SNHD, here in, guess where? Southern Nevada, would report data. You could see some of the data on their website. They would report that data to the the national database, which I'm guessing the CDC, which may or may not be in business anymore. Who knows? So you don't try to tackle the problem from the top. You build up from the bottom, or from closer to the data, closer to the ground, I like to say. So you say, we can try to capture this data nationally, or we can capture the data nationally from health departments that are local, because they're already collecting that data locally. So this Southern Nevada Health District would only have to manage 2.4 million people's worth of data. So they can be in direct contact with hospitals and doctors in the county. They can interact with other counties nearby. They would have some handle on any sort of tourism that's still happening for whatever reason. So they have a much better view of the potential real-time data changes, right? And whenever you're doing anything with time series, the actual time is actually important. So if you enable data collection and data capture, if you like, closer to the source, more local, you're off to a better start already. If you do read the book, you will sense the Recoding America book, you will sense some frustration in the red tape that entangles most, if not all, of our government bureaucracy. And there is arguably some technical debt that could be paid off to try to make this tape less sticky, perhaps, less tangly. So technical debt is stuff that you should fix now, but you put off, right? If you haven't backed up your data lately, you have technical debt. You have data backup debt, to be more specific. If you're running a computer that's 5 years old, as I am, you might have some technical, it runs okay. I got a new processor, so I got to put that in, speed it up a little bit. Do I want to spend money on a fully new system? Well, it kind of works. And that's kind of what the IRS was doing for too long. So they didn't have modern computers, and suddenly they found that processing all this data was taking too long. And we can actually do it quicker with modern systems as long as you move all your data over. This is all technical debt. And it can have real impact, especially when things go wrong. As we are also hearing this at this time that I'm recording this, there are 2 million or more federal employees. I don't remember the exact number. And I don't remember if they've been talking about every single civil servant or just the set of people that are in the crosshairs of Doge. I don't recall, but there's a lot of federal employees. It sounds like 2 million is too small. It might be 2 million though. Presently going through some chaos with the Doge effort to make government more efficient. I guess it's in the name. So whether they'll be removed from the civil servant workforce, moved around, it's hard to say. If open government principles can be applied locally first, that is with local government generated and captured data, as can be seen in our own City of Las Vegas data sets. So I've posted to the top of the open government portal. And as I said, there are links to other data sets, and the GeoCommons GeoCommons data sets are more visually descriptive. You can get a handle on, I'll tell you right now, there's a database of parking. So it's a visualizable database. You can view it on a Google Earth tool. So it's KML files, if you like, spreadsheets and so on. You can see, and unfortunately the scope is only downtown Las Vegas, but you can see actual parking structures, how many parking spaces, whether they're pay or free, etc. So there's an actual data set of parking. So it would be great if that was all of Clark County. And that's why we have our open data capture platform initiative, which is to try to expand the amount of data that's stored and published in these open data sets so that it's useful for everyone, not just people downtown. That's another form of inclusivity. If we actually make use of these day-to-day news in day-to-day news and services online rather than the local open data resources looking nice, but nobody has any idea these resources are available, we can actually make data availability a norm and perhaps an expectation. Hey, I should be able to see where all of the parking spaces are in the greater Vegas area. Why can't I? Oh, but you can. We just have some work to do. The data infrastructure is already there. So that's one upside. We just have to actually capture data, put it in the system. And I already had that conversation many moons ago. Making ballot counting, making ballot counting, not a ballot counting. Making ballot counting a local use case, for example, at a county or state level does not force such an issue at country scale. But if voting still takes place according to established norms, it may be possible to expand that awareness and show a practical use case. So like make receipt and counting of mail-in and drop-off ballots visible in real time, as well as the actual ballot count process in real time. And we have counting machines. Every time a machine counts a ballot, it gets added to a public total. It could be added to a public blockchain of some sort. So the voting doesn't change. You haven't tried to vote on the blockchain, but you're reporting on something like a blockchain or public real-time data would change the game a little bit. Now there's no question that my ballot, I can see my ballot. It's not attached to my name, but I have the number. I have the stub. I have the receipt. I know what I'm looking for. There's my ballot. I know it's been received. I know it's been counted. Now, Nevada actually does have some of that infrastructure in place, but it's not real time, not even close. And it's still a little dubious because you can search for your own name in the database, and they keep track of that link to the ballot. The ballot doesn't have your name on it, but it has a number, identifying number. So they will tell you, oh, it's been received, it's been counted, thank you for voting. But that took days, maybe even a week. I dropped my ballot off, and it still took forever. dropped it off at a polling station. And I've worked at a polling place, by the way. That's another topic for another day. Rather than trying to change a huge machine at the top, we implement real and demonstrably useful and trustworthy systems down here at the bottom where the people are on the ground in our towns and cities, and allow people to become familiar and even interested in knowing what is going on rather than hearing about it in a TikTok video. So the case for open government is to connect people with what's really happening. This may not be politically attractive. We can only speculate as to motivations to pursue or to not pursue, and maybe even to block the notion of open data publishing and so on. As I'm speaking right now, there is some tumult in the arena of published data. Some government websites are being taken down completely, or they're being sanitized with some terminology and reference information that no longer complies with executive orders and so on. So again, not getting into the politics, but the mechanics of removing data from data sets that other data and applications may depend on is tricky. A lot of things break, as we say in the programming world, and it's not always expected. And now you've introduced a level of distrust. It can be kind of a mess. So I'm personally an advocate for starting from the bottom up. So having local data capture, local data governance, and to set expectations in the general public. So our 2.4 million or so people in the Clark County, Southern Nevada area, if they became more familiar with the data sets that are already available, and they're not always completely current, and they're not always large enough in scope. Like I said, the parking database, only downtown Vegas. Why not all parking? So if we can start somewhere and get people in a locality, it doesn't have to be Vegas, but to understand that, oh, okay, so the government is publishing this data, it is available, and I can actually look at it and see what it is. If only it wasn't a spreadsheet, because I hate spreadsheets. Well, okay, so develop different visualizations and so on, but know that the data is stored authoritatively and so on. So building up trust and awareness should start local, but open government could be at all levels of government. And again, not political. We're not talking about the politics. We're talking about the actual process of running government and servicing the makeup of what the government is overseeing, right? What are you governing? People, infrastructure. The data about these things is just a reality, and we actually have some implementation of open data programs. We can do more, and we can have greater awareness, and we can actually establish what I will say should be more and better levels of trust in that data. So that's where I'm going to leave it right now. So like I said, the city of Las Vegas does have the open data sets. Check those out if you're a Vegas local, or if you're just curious. And your city or town might have something similar, or your state might have open data sets. Check those out as well. You can start at the data.gov portal. There may be data sets that you can locate through there. There are other data set directories. I think data.world might still be around. If you look for open data catalogs, you might find various catalog directories and search engines and so on. I have done this, so I know there are methods to find these things. Once you find a good source that points to your data collections, throw a bookmark in your bookmarks folder, right? So yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you so much for listening. We're just over an hour, so thanks for tolerating a longer episode this week, and take care. Don't get drawn in too much to the hype and the panic, but do your research and see what's going on, and that's always true every time. Bye-bye.